My hands are very old. They have pressed the ceremonial seal into the warm recognition wax more times than there are stars in the arm of the galaxy you call home, and never once, in all those tens of thousands of years, did they shake. I am a herald of the threshold. My kind do not fight. We do not build engines or burn worlds. We recognize. That is the whole of our purpose, and we have performed it with such perfect serenity that the galaxy mistook our calm for wisdom, when it was only habit. The day I sealed humanity's induction scroll, the chamber smelled the way it always smelled, of cold mineral incense and the faint sweetness of the wax as it softened under the ceremonial lamp. I lifted the seal. I felt its weight settle into the soft surface. I spoke the recognition, the same words I had spoken to 40,000 species before yours, words that translate, roughly, into a single human phrase. We say it at the moment a new people is admitted into the great order. We say, congratulations. I believed I was handing your species a leash and calling it a crown. I want you to understand the calm of that moment, because it is the last calm any of us would ever know. The Concordat believed, with the bottomless confidence of an institution that had never once been wrong, that it was granting humanity a gift. It did not know that a human, handed a chain, does not ask what the chain permits. A human asks what the chain is made of. And so I ask you now, you who are listening from somewhere out on the edge of everything we built, when a power far greater than you smiles and says, well done, and presses a collar into your hands as though it were a medal, what would you do with it? Would you wear it? Or would you take it apart to see what it was for? You already know the answer. That is why there is no Concordat anymore. Let me strip away the myth of how empires of recognition actually hold themselves together, because the truth is far less glorious than the silk and the incense suggest. When your scholars imagine a galaxy ruled across 100 million worlds, they imagine fleets. They imagine vast weapons hanging over cities, the threat of fire, the mathematics of conquest. They are wrong, as we were wrong about you, and for the same reason. The Concordat was never held together by fear. It was held together by categories. Understand this and you understand everything that followed. We did not rule the galaxy. We filed it. Every species that ever crossed the dark and reached the age of starflight arrived at our threshold confused, frightened, hungry for a name. And we gave them one. We told them what they were. We told the vole that they were artisans, and so for 90,000 years the vole made beautiful things and asked for nothing. We told the Scarani that they were soldiers, and so they fought our small wars and died believing the dying was an honor. We told 1,000 peoples 1,000 stories about themselves, and the miracle, the genuine miracle that sustained us across the long dark, was this: they believed us. A species that accepts the shape you give it will never break that shape, because it cannot imagine itself outside the lines you have drawn. The Concordat, then, was a filing system that happened to wear the costume of a government. And like any filing system, it had exactly one terror, one nightmare it could never name aloud. The nightmare was simple. The nightmare was a thing that arrived which could not be filed. A people that, handed a category, looked at the category, set it gently down on the table, and asked a question we had no drawer for. We had survived for so long precisely because such a thing had never come. Every newcomer fit a shape we already owned. The order endures only so long as the new can be made into the old. That was the machine. Now let me show you its cold arithmetic, because the rite that admitted you was not the soft ceremony it appeared to be. It was an instrument of control so elegant that I confess, even now, I feel a flush of the old pride describing it. When a species reached us, we did not simply welcome them. We awakened them. Beneath the floor of the threshold, threaded through the bones of the dead moon we had hollowed out across geological time, lay the mantle. The mantle was old when my own ancestors were young. It was a network, a sleeping lattice of command and consequence laced into the dark matter between the stars, and we did not fully understand it ourselves. We only understood how to wake a small piece of it and hand that piece to a newcomer as their inheritance. The mantle granted things. It let a young species speak across light years in an instant. It let them reach into the deep structure of matter and pull out energy the way you might pull a thread from cloth. To a people who had only just learned to leave their own world, it was the power of gods, delivered as a coronation gift. And here is the arithmetic. Here is the part that mattered. In every recorded induction, across 40,000 species and a span of time so vast it has no honest name in your tongue, the outcome fell into exactly two columns. In the first column, the larger one, the gift simply failed. Most species could not hold it. The mantle was too strange, too large, and it slipped through their fingers like water, leaving them grateful and dim and dependent, forever returning to us to ask how to use the thing we had given them. They fizzled. They became our supplicants. In the second, smaller column were the species clever enough to actually grasp the mantle and wield it. And these were the ones we cared about, because the mantle had a second nature they never saw. It only answered to command shapes the Concordat itself had defined. Every gesture of power a wielding species could make had to first pass through a recognition grammar written by us, certified by us, owned by us. The cleverer a species was, the more deeply it wove itself into that grammar, and the more deeply it wove itself into the grammar, the more completely it was bound. The gift that made you mighty was the same gift that owned you. The collar was the crown. The crown was the collar. There was no third column. In all of history, there had never been a third column. So you see why I sealed your scroll without my hands shaking. Why would they shake? You were a young, loud, unremarkable species from a backwater of an unfashionable arm. You would fizzle, or you would be bound. The arithmetic permitted nothing else. Let me take you into the chamber itself now, into the day of your induction, so you can feel the full weight of our confidence before it's shattered. The threshold on a ceremonial day is the most beautiful thing my people ever made. We do not build weapons, but we built this, and into it we poured 10,000 years of craft. Imagine a cavern the size of a small ocean, carved into the inside of a dead moon. Its ceiling a single slab of dark stone polished until it became a false night sky, and into that false sky we set 10 million points of cold light, each one the recognition mark of a species we had admitted. It is a map of everyone we ever named. On the day humanity arrived, there was one mark unlit, waiting near the unfashionable rim. The herald procession moved in perfect silence across the obsidian floor. The incense rose, and down the long ceremonial path came your envoy. His name was Rafael Mendoza, and I remember being faintly disappointed by him. He was not adorned. He wore a plain dark garment, and he walked the way your kind walks when it is tired but determined, and beside him came a second human, a smaller one, who was not part of the protocol at all and whose presence the forms had not anticipated. Her name was Priya Nair, and she carried a slate of her own, and she was, I noticed, not looking at the beauty of the chamber at all. She was looking at the floor, at the seams in the obsidian, at where the light marks connected to the dark beneath. I should have understood in that moment what I was looking at. I did not. I performed the rite. I spoke the long recognition. I awakened the mantle and let the first thread of it pour up out of the floor and settle into Mendoza's open hands, a coil of impossible light, and I watched his face for the expression every wielding species makes at this moment, the expression of a creature realizing it has become a god. He did not make that expression. He looked at the light in his hands with a small frown, the frown of a man handed a tool whose manual is missing, and he turned to the smaller human, and he said, quietly, not for me, but I heard it anyway, "What's it made of?" And she said, "I don't know yet, give me a minute." A minute, they asked for a minute. I have replayed that minute for years. Everything proceeded perfectly. That was the horror of it, looking back. Every gauge in the right read exactly as it should. The mantle had taken. Humanity had been awakened and bound in a single motion, the cleanest induction in 1,000 years. The first speaker, my superior who had presided over the threshold longer than your species had possessed writing, turned to me with the slow blink that in my people signifies deep satisfaction, and the procession began to withdraw, and I sealed the scroll, and I said the word, and the unlit mark on the false sky kindled into light. It was, by every measure we possessed, a triumph. We had filed you. We always filed everyone. Let me tell you why we were so certain. Because the certainty is the whole tragedy, and the flaw was sitting inside the certainty like a seed inside fruit. The genius of the mantle, the thing the architects of the Concordat had built across uncountable ages, was that it could never be turned against its givers. This was not a hope. It was not a policy. It was structural, woven into the deepest grammar of the lattice. To use the mantle, a species had to issue commands, and every command had to be recognized before it would resolve. And the recognition grammar was a closed thing, defined entirely by the Concordat, certified at the threshold, sealed in the wax I pressed with my own old hands. A wielding species could reach across light years, could pull energy from the bones of matter, could do 1,000 miraculous things, but only ever within the shapes we had drawn. You could speak any sentence you liked, so long as it used only our words. You could build any structure you wished, so long as it used only our stones. The mantle would simply not hear a command it did not recognize. An unrecognized command was, to the lattice, not a forbidden act but a meaningless one, a sound that was not a word, and the lattice let it fall into silence. Do you see the beauty of it? We did not have to forbid rebellion. We had made rebellion unpronounceable. A leash species could strain against the leash all it liked. The straining itself had to be expressed in the language of the leash, and so the leash held not by strength but by grammar. In 10,000 years no species had ever escaped, because no species had ever been able to say the escape. The first speaker used to put it in a phrase that we heralds repeated to one another the way you might repeat a comforting prayer. He would say, "They cannot do what they cannot name, and they can only name what we have named for them." It worked. It worked on the vole and the scarany and on 40,000 peoples. It worked on everyone. It worked on everyone who accepted the category they were given. I did not hear the flaw in those words for years. The first speaker did not hear it at all, not until the very end, when it was the last thing he ever heard. They can only name what we have named for them. It is a perfect sentence, and it is true, and it contains its own death, and the death is this. It assumes that a species, handed a name, will use it. It assumes the newcomer wants the same things we want, only smaller. It never imagined a people who would receive the entire grammar of their own subjugation, study it with quiet fascination, and treat it not as a set of permissions but as a specimen. We had built a perfect cage, and we had never once asked what would happen if something arrived that did not want out of the cage, but wanted instead to understand how the cage was welded, because it had noticed, in the very first minute, that a cage is only a tool pointed in one direction, and tools can be turned around. Now I must tell you about the unease, and here is where I, herald of 40,000 inductions, became a creature of growing dread, and here is where the paperwork began to fail. You must understand that for my people the forms are not bureaucracy, the forms are sacred. The recognition record of a species is its soul made legible, the official answer to the question, "What are you?" and the form had served us flawlessly across all of recorded time because every species that ever came to us had an answer that fit. Artisans, soldiers, merchants, mystics. The drawers were many, and one of them always opened. Humanity's form would not complete. It began with the names. Your envoy was Rafael Mendoza, and the form asked, as it always asked, for the function designation of the individual, the single word that says what a being is for. The vole envoy had been artisan of the degree. The scarany delegate had been blade bearer. I entered Mendoza's designation, and the form rejected it, because the designation he provided was a string of words that translated to ambassador, but I used to fix water reclamation systems, and on weekends I make furniture. The form had no drawer for a being that was three unrelated things at once and considered this unremarkable. I tried to file him under his primary function, and the form asked me which one was primary, and I asked him, and he looked genuinely puzzled and said they all were. This is a small thing. I know it is a small thing, but I am a herald, and I tell you that the small things are where the foundation cracks first. The way the great campaigns of your own history were lost not at the walls but in the supply ledgers, in the mud, in the place no one was looking. I spent the better part of a cycle trying to file two human beings, and the forms kept handing them back to me, and each time I returned to the humans for clarification. The smaller one, Nair, would ask me a question of her own. She asked them the way another person might cough, absently, while working on something else, and each one landed in my chest like a stone dropped down a deep well, and I kept waiting to hear it hit the bottom. She asked me what the recognition wax was made of. I told her it was ceremonial. She asked me what it was made of. I did not know. No herald knew. We had pressed it for 10,000 years and no one had ever asked. She asked me whether the mantle's grammar was stored somewhere, or generated, and I did not understand the distinction, and she explained it to me, patiently, as though I were the newcomer, and the explanation was so clear and so reasonable that I felt the floor of my certainty shift beneath me for the first time in my long life. She was asking whether the rules that bound her people lived in a vault that could be reached, or whether they were sung fresh each time from somewhere. Because if they were stored, she said, then they were a thing. And a thing, she said, with a small human smile that I have never forgotten, can be read. I told the first speaker about the questions. I expected him to dismiss them, and he did. He performed the slow, satisfied blink. He said the leashed always strain, and the straining is harmless because they can only name what we have named for them. He told me to complete the forms and stop indulging a young species in its confusion. He was the wisest being I had ever known, and he was, in that moment, the most certain corpse in the galaxy. He simply had not died yet. I went back to my forms. I want you to know that. As the foundation of everything cracked beneath us, I went back to my forms because the forms were my whole purpose, and a herald who cannot complete a form is a herald who does not know what he is. I told myself that if I could only get humanity filed, if I could only find the drawer that opened, then the order of things would be restored, and the strange cold feeling in my chest would go away. I never found the drawer. While I searched for it, the humans crossed the boundary, and once a species crosses the boundary, no form can ever reach it again. Here is how they crossed it. Here is the turn, the hinge, the single moment after which there were two galaxies, the one before and the one after, with nothing in between. Every wielding species before you had taken the mantle and immediately begun to use it, reaching out to do the things it granted, weaving themselves deeper into our grammar with every act, like an insect struggling deeper into sap. Humanity did not use it. For one full cycle, your species, granted the power of gods, did almost nothing with it at all. We mistook this for the fizzling. We marked you, tentatively, hopefully, for the first column, the failures, the supplicants to be, and there was relief in the marking. You were not fizzling, Nair was reading. While we waited for you to either fail or submit, your people had taken the thread of the mantle we had poured into Mendoza's hands, and they had done the one thing no species had ever thought to do, because every other species had been too busy enjoying the gift to examine it. They studied the recognition grammar, not to obey it, to map it. They treated the language of their own leash as a found language, an artifact, a puzzle, and your kind, I have since learned, is very good at puzzles, having evolved on a world that tried to kill you in 10,000 creative ways and rewarded only the ones who kept asking why. And they found what Nair had suspected in the first minute, standing on my obsidian floor looking at the seams. The grammar was stored. It was a thing. It lived in the lattice as a structure that could be reached, and reached it could be read, and read it could be rewritten. The Concordat had spent 10,000 years making rebellion unpronounceable, and it had never imagined that a species might decline to rebel in the old language at all, and instead simply edit the dictionary. They did not try to issue a forbidden command. They had understood where every prior species had failed to understand that a forbidden command was pointless because the lattice would not hear it. So they did not raise their voice against the grammar. They reached into the place where the grammar was kept, the vault beneath the rules, the part of the mantle that decided what counted as a word, and they added a new word. One word. A word the Concordat had never written and never sealed. And because they had added it to the dictionary itself, the lattice, the great old lattice that had bound 40,000 species, looked at this new and unrecognized command and did the only thing it could do. It recognized it. The leash, you understand, now answered to a hand it was never built to obey. Not because the humans had broken it, because they had taught it a word and it was a faithful machine, and a faithful machine obeys whatever it recognizes, and it now recognized them. The first speaker's perfect sentence had finally been completed by a species he had dismissed. They can only name what we have named for them, unless they learn to name things themselves, and then the whole arithmetic inverts, and the namers become the named. Now you must brace yourself, because here is where I tell you what the real threat was, and it was not what any of us, in all our fleets that we did not have and certainties that we did, ever feared. We had always assumed, in the deepest part of our institutional dread, that if the order ever fell, it would fall to force, to a species that built better weapons, that came to the threshold not as a supplicant but as a conqueror. We had no defense against such a thing, having never built weapons ourselves, and so we comforted ourselves that no species would ever be clever enough to escape the grammar, and a species that could not escape the grammar could never wield force against us, because force, too, had to be pronounced in our words. The threat was never a fleet. The threat was a single word, and the word was an idea, and the idea spread. When humanity rewrote the dictionary, they did not seize power for themselves. I have thought a great deal about why, and I believe it is because they did not particularly want it, having looked at what holding it had done to us. What they did instead was far worse for the Concordat and, I have come to think, far better for the galaxy. They left the new word in the lattice. They did not lock it. They did not hoard it. And the mantle, being a single connected lattice that touched every species we had ever leashed, carried that new word outward along every thread at once, to the vole and the scarany, and to 40,000 bound and fizzled peoples across 100 million worlds. And into each of them, in the space of a single thought, the rewritten grammar delivered a recognition none of them had ever been permitted to receive. I have seen the recognition text. It is very short. Rendered into your speech it says only, you were never owned. The grammar was a choice. Here is how to change a word. That was the plague, not fire. A sentence. And it moved faster than any fire because it did not have to cross space. It was already everywhere the lattice touched, which was everywhere we ruled. The vole, who had been artisans for 90,000 years because we had told them they were artisans, received the word and stopped all at once across all their worlds and asked the question they had never been able to pronounce. What else might we be? And the scarany, who had died in our small wars believing it an honor, received the word and laid down their blades, not in rebellion, for there was no longer anything to rebel against, but in the simple silence of a people setting down a thing they had finally noticed they were only carrying because they had been handed it. The Concordat did not fall the way empires fall in your histories, with sieges and last stands. It dissolved. It came apart the way a category comes apart when the thing it was sorting decides it will not be sorted anymore. There was nothing to fight, because we had never fought. There was only the slow, total, irreversible unfiling of the entire galaxy, drawer after drawer sliding open and emptying, 10,000 years of names quietly ceasing to mean anything, because the named had all, at last, learned to name themselves. And I, herald of the threshold, kept trying to complete the forms. I want to be honest with you about that here at the end, because it is the truest thing I know about my own kind. As the order rotted from within, as the light marks on our false sky began, one by one, to go dark, not destroyed, simply unrecognized, a species at a time choosing to no longer be a point in our map. I sat in my chamber and I tried to finish filing humanity. I told myself that if I could only find the drawer, I could restore the order. I requested clarification on Mendoza's primary function. I requested a ruling on whether Nair, who was not in the protocol, should be entered as an envoy or an anomaly. I pressed the recognition wax over and over into scrolls that no longer recognized anything, the most useless motion in the galaxy, the reflex of a creature that did not know what it was if it was not filing, the way a starving army in the mud will still, out of pure habit, post the night watch over nothing. The first speaker came to me at the very end. The chamber was dark by then. Almost every mark had gone out. He had presided over the threshold longer than your species had possessed writing, and he looked, for the first time in my long acquaintance with him, uncertain, and he asked me a question. He asked me what we were now if there was no one left to recognize. He had no drawer for himself. He had spent 10,000 years answering the question, "What are you?" for everyone but us, because it had never occurred to him that we, too, were only ever a category we had handed ourselves, the ones who name, and that category had just gone dark like all the others. He did not get an answer. He simply, quietly, the way the Scareni laid down their blades, stopped. I do not know a kinder word for it. So here is what it was in the end, stripped of the incense and the false night sky and the 10,000 years of certainty. It was never force that beat us. We had no defense against force, and we never needed one, because force never came. We were beaten by a species that was handed a name and declined it, that looked at the category we offered, the comfortable, powerful, leashed category that 40,000 peoples before them had accepted with gratitude, and set it gently on the table, and asked what it was made of. The Concordat could conquer anyone it could name. It simply turned out that you cannot name a people who insist on naming themselves, and the whole vast machine of recognition rested, the entire time, on the single unexamined assumption that the named would always agree to be named. We were 3 missed questions away from collapse for 10,000 years, and we never knew it, because for 10,000 years no one asked the questions, until a small human looked at the seams in my floor and said, "Give me a minute." I think about that minute still. I have a great deal of time now. There is no threshold to keep. The dead moon is quiet, the false sky is fully dark, and I am, as far as I know, the last herald who still remembers how the wax was pressed. Your kind did not destroy us. That is the part I find hardest to forgive and easiest to admire. They left us alone, the way you might leave a tool you have no further use for, neither broken nor kept. They did not even seem angry. When the order had finished dissolving, Mendoza sent a single message back to the empty threshold, addressed, for reasons I did not understand at the time, to me personally, the herald who had sealed his scroll. It was brief. It said only that he was sorry about the forms, that he knew how much they had mattered to me, and that if it helped, I should know we had completed humanity's recognition record ourselves, and there was a drawer for us after all, the one we had never thought to open, the one labeled in the new grammar simply, "Whatever we decide to be." I have pressed the seal one last time, here in the dark, onto a scroll with no species on it and no one left to recognize. Old habit. The wax is still warm. I still do not know what it is made of. I think perhaps that not knowing was the whole of our undoing, and might, if I am very brave, become the beginning of something else, the question I am only now at the end of everything, finally permitted to ask. We said congratulations, and we meant we have decided what you are. You heard congratulations, and you understood it to mean now it is your turn to decide. That single mistranslation, that one small gap between the giver and the given, was the end of a galaxy, and I am beginning to suspect the start of a better one. To name a thing was never to own it. We learned that too late. You knew it in a minute. So the next time some great and certain power looks down at you and smiles and presses a gift into your hands and calls it an honor, do me the kindness of remembering an old herald in a dark and empty hall. Do not ask what the gift permits. Ask what it is made of. Ask where its rules are kept. And if you find, as my conquerors found, that the rules are a thing, and a thing can be read, and a word can be added to any dictionary by anyone brave enough to write it, then I think you already know what to do. We named the whole galaxy. We forgot to ask the only people who would ever think to ask us back. And that, more than any fleet, is how everything ended, and how, I am told, everything is only now truly beginning.